Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Pascal Siakam is available to be had via trade. At least that's the report right now around the multi-time All-Star, as the Toronto Raptors are perhaps entering a rebuild, or maybe even just a better word for it would be a retooling. We've talked about the RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley, OG Anunoby trade on this channel already, and because of that deal, there are going to be likely more deals coming in the future. There's questions about Pascal Siakam, Gary Trent Jr. Where will we see some of these players end up? And of course, in this video specifically, we're focused on Pascal Siakam because he might be the biggest domino to drop this NBA trade deadline. We're going to have trade guides coming out on the channel and a lot of these potential trade packages as well, as we discuss and kind of look at the landscape of the NBA, what makes sense for what teams, what kind of activity level will we expect. And I'm going to tell you, this video is going to get a little bit crazy because kind of a couple weeks ago when I did a thought exercise on what teams could I see getting involved in Pascal Siakam, I ran into a lot of issues, and most of it came down to, will the Raptors actually decide to sell? Now with the OG Anunoby trade, it kind of opened up the pathways for me, and I feel like I had a lot of creativity in here. Also, some of these trade packages were kind of starting points from trades that were in our Discord group. If you want to be a part of that Discord server, the link is down in the description. We talk a lot of fun NBA basketball, a lot of participation. We have over 200 members right now, and we'd love to have you join in there too. We have a lot of fun daily pick'em games and a lot of great stuff going on. Be a great area, great community for you to be a part of, so make sure to go join that. Also, go follow us on Twitter. There's 2 Twitter links down in the description, so make sure to go give us a follow there. And without further ado, let's jump into it with some of the trade packages here. The first one here is with the Sacramento Kings, and you can see I don't actually have a deal finalized, and I wanted to touch on Sacramento first as one of the 8 teams we're going to talk about in this video. That's right, you heard me, 8 teams that we're going to discuss possibly trading for Pascal Siakam. Again, creative juices were flowing. I was thinking of a bunch of different deals, and I'll tell you, the very last one in this video is absolutely crazy, but honestly I kind of love it the more and more I've thought about it, as these deals have kind of come together over time in my head. Spend a lot of time making sure that there's value going both ways in deals, and of course trying to make them as fair as possible. Now, one thing I do have to say is not every NBA trade is fair. There's a lot of deals that go down where one team got the better end of the stick. That's just the way that it works. But the Raptors, Masai Ujiri specifically, likes to make fair deals and likes to make deals that he feels comfortable he's getting a good return back, and I think he did that in the OG Anunoby trade. And now with the Pascal Siakam trade, we're going to talk about the issue here for Sacramento and why I just can't see the Kings actually making a trade for him. And it really comes down to the money. Siakam making nearly $38 million this year. Harrison Barnes is the player that they would like to flip out and send in a deal to get Pascal Siakam, if I had to guess. Just looking at the positional upgrade at the power forward position, Siakam fits their offense really well. I think he'd be really good in Mike Brown's Zoom setting. And I think that they would find a lot of success with him there. Just how do you financially get a deal like that to work? And for Sacramento, there's really just not a way to do that because you're looking at the players you'd have to send out. Of course, Fox and Sabonis are non-starters. Then Kevin Huerter, that's been the player that I've seen a lot of people throw into trades. I don't think people understand how important Kevin Huerter is to their team. One of the things I misevaluated a few off seasons ago was when they traded for Kevin Huerter, I thought they really hurt their flexibility, but with the way that Mike Brown coaches now, some of the changes he made to his offense that I did not foresee coming before he actually coached a game in Sacramento, he completely relies on Kevin Huerter at times as a focal point in their offense, off of dribble handoffs, playing with Sabonis. Those two guys have such a good chemistry. You can't throw Huerter into a deal. Malik Monk doesn't really make sense to include in a trade. And I know Raptors fans are going to say, oh, Keegan Murray. I'm going to tell you right now, Monty McNair and Mike Brown have no interest in moving Keegan Murray. He is a focal point, long part of their franchise, former number 4 overall pick. They absolutely love this kid. He's averaging 15 points a game. They are not including him in any trade for Pascal Siakam. I can completely and utterly promise you that. So that's a non-starter here as well. And then you get into some of these other contracts, like do you throw Vezenkov and Davion Mitchell and Chris Duarte? And like looking at this, you're already seeing some of the issues. That's $32.5 million, and we're making a 4-for-1 trade. And then it really comes down to like which one of these players actually helps Toronto. The answer is probably none of them. So this is why this just doesn't make sense. Sacramento is a non-starter for me. So let's jump into team number 2. Team number 2 here, this is a deal that I don't love for either side, to be completely honest, but that's okay. The whole point of these trade packages aren't for me to sit here and say, oh, this is a win-win trade or this is great for both teams. It's a realistic trade. This is a trade that I could see both teams discussing, talking about, maybe agreeing upon, perhaps not, but maybe. And it's a situation where the Dallas Mavericks land Pascal Siakam. And as a Mavericks fan myself, I can tell you Pascal Siakam is not the solution Dallas needs. Now, I think he would drastically help their offense. Playing as a cutter, playing as a slasher, would give them a little bit more downhill juice and give them a little bit more, points in the paint that they could badly use, especially when one of Luka or Kyrie are not in the game. I think Siakam would be a big upgrade on the offensive end in some ways, but at the same time, he's not a great catch-and-shoot three-point shooter. He's not a great three-point shooter in general. And really, when you're looking at their closing lineups with Luka, Kyrie, Siakam on the floor, with presumably Derek Lively and then maybe one of Dante Exum or Derek Jones Jr., the question, or Grant Williams, you could also include in that, of course. The question for Dallas is, like, what does Siakam really do for you? And yes, he's a really good player, and for Toronto, you don't want to give him up for nothing. And this is why I think it's a lose-lose trade. I don't think Siakam maximizes Dallas, and I also think the Raptors don't really get a lot of great stuff here in this deal. Now, there's some interesting pieces. There's some young players that I think there is futures for in the league. But if you're Toronto, are you the destination for those teams to have, or for those players to have a future? And I think the answer to that is no. Tim Hardaway Jr. is having a fantastic season off the bench. Should be firmly in the consideration for Sixth Man of the Year. He's been electric off the bench for Dallas. He's had some awesome moments, especially when Kyrie was out. Hardaway Jr. stepped up big time for Dallas. He's making about $18 million. It's a good contract, I would say. Richaun Holmes is in here for the money. And if you're the Raptors, though, you're looking at THJ and Richaun Holmes, and what does that really provide you long-term next to Scotty Barnes, next to RJ Barrett, next to Emmanuel Quickley? The answer is nothing. So the young players you're getting in this deal that maybe have some long-term value for you are Josh Green and Jaden Hardy. I like both of these guys. I think Josh Green can really play. I think he's got a lot more functional playmaking capabilities than Dallas currently uses. He's one of the more athletic playmakers in the league. He leaves his feet, honestly, way too often. It's a concern every time he does it, but he seemingly always throws a laser pinpoint pass to somebody out on the perimeter. So even with Green, when he's making decisions that you're like, uh-oh, this is going to end poorly, sometimes it still ends pretty well because he's just got this like weird quirk to him as a player that most other players, if they made the decisions he did, it wouldn't work, but with him, sometimes it does. And obviously, the question for Josh Green has been, what's his real role? People title everyone as 3-and-D. I think Green's more of a cutter and more like kind of on-ball playmaker-y. He's like a more athletic Kyle Anderson in some ways, honestly. Not really the playmaking feel of Kyle Anderson. Kyle Anderson's a lot more grounded, a lot more disciplined as a decision maker, whereas Green a little bit more wild and kind of causes a lot more havoc, but he's young still. So there's some tools to work with here. Again, though, if you're looking at Toronto specifically, how does that fit next to Scotty Barnes? How does that fit next to RJ Barrett? Does that fit next to Jakob Poeltl? And the answer for me is probably not. So I just don't like Josh Green here in Toronto. Jaden Hardy, a player who I was very high on pre-draft. I think he's a talented guy. In games where Luka Doncic has been out this year, he stepped up. A game in Minnesota specifically, he scored 17 points as a starting guard for them, and honestly was a big part in keeping Dallas competitive in that game with no Luka, no Kyrie. And the Mavs still kind of played a really tough Timberwolves team pretty close. And then in this deal, you're also getting a couple second-round picks, and really the big swing factor here for Toronto. The only reason I think Toronto would really consider this is, first of all, you're getting a couple of young guys, but you're also getting that 2027 first unprotected from Dallas. And for me, if I had to pick a winner, I would say it's Toronto here, because I think that 2027 first from Dallas could be very, very valuable, depending on what happens with Luka Doncic over the next 24 months. If Luka Doncic asks out at some point, Dallas becomes an instant tire fire. They're going to probably enter a rebuild mode, or you never know. They might try and win by trading Luka Doncic. You can't really trust the front office there in Dallas, but like that 2027 first might be really good, which is why if I'm Toronto, like I would maybe have some consideration of it and see if you can reroute some of these players elsewhere to get more draft assets and continue building around Scotty Barnes in a good, beneficial way. But again, for me, this is like a lose-lose trade, because I think if you're Toronto, you can look at it and say, we're not maximizing Siakam's value. I completely agree. And a lot of these players don't fit long-term in Toronto. And if you're Dallas, you're taking a pretty big gamble here, trading your only tradable first-round pick, two young guys that you've invested decently into a high second rounder in Hardy, a mid to late first rounder in Josh Green, and your 6th man of the year candidate. So this is like a potential big risk for them. Now maybe Siakam does elevate them a bit, but I just don't really see it myself, especially for their closing lineups when they're all on the floor together. I think Siakam helps a lot in the minutes where there is no Luka or no Kyrie Irving. But again, when you're trying to play at full strength and you're trying to keep up with the best teams in the league, I just don't know if Siakam's the missing piece there in Dallas for a team that really relies on corner three-point shooting and playing off the catch off of Luka Doncic. I just don't know if Siakam's the guy in that role, unfortunately. Let's get into our third team here, and this one is in a deal with the Los Angeles Lakers. And listen, this deal, I know it says failed on your screen. The reason here down in the right corner, it says salary increase. Because of D'Lo and Rui Hachimura signing extensions with the Lakers this past offseason, they cannot technically be traded until January 15th, so 10 days after this video comes out on YouTube. So just have a little bit of patience. And this is another deal here for the Raptors where I'm like, I don't know if I love this for them. The Lakers get Pascal Siakam. The Lakers are always in the heart of the trade rumors at this time of the season because every offseason they somehow win the offseason, but then none of their guys are really that good. I remember when everyone was freaking out saying, oh my gosh, they got Jackson Hayes. Now he's not playing most nights. And then you also look at the fact that Darvin Ham is potentially on the hot seat. The Lakers, there's a lot of concerns about this team right now. And Pascal Siakam, I think, would actually improve them quite a bit as a cutter off of LeBron and Davis. I think that they could use a little bit more wiggle in their offense, especially given the fact that they're already a team that doesn't shoot a ton of threes. I think Siakam kind of fits into their team identity, the way that they're actually trying to play this season. Not saying it's the best way to play, and I'm not suggesting that they're making all the right calls there from a coaching perspective, but that is their identity. So Siakam fits into that, whereas he did not fit into that identity when we talked about the Dallas Mavericks. And for the Raptors here, you're getting D'Angelo Russell. I really don't love this for them. I do think Rui Hachimura is not a bad get. He's got a perimeter game where he's kind of taken steps forward as a three-point shooter. I do think in bigger lineups, which is something Masai Ujiri has dabbled in the past and does like the idea of, you could have lineups on the court with, of course, Scotty Barnes, Jakob Poeltl, Rui Hachimura, RJ Barrett, and then insert whatever guard you want. And at some point, maybe that becomes Jalen Hood-Schifino, and you've got a lineup that's all 6'6" and taller. So it's an interesting combination. I don't know if I love it for Toronto again, though, but I think Hachimura does make some sense for them. Jalen Hood-Schifino, number 17 overall pick in the 2023 NBA draft. Really, the big swing skill for him is the three-point shot. Didn't shoot it super consistently at Indiana. He's got a really nice mid-range pull-up jump shot, though. He's a pretty adept pick-and-roll ball handler, passer, decision-maker, and he's comfortable against drop coverage. So there's a lot of tangible, usable skills already in place for JHS. Obviously, he's not been a big part of the Lakers' rotation this year, as you would expect for a team trying to contend for a title, and he's a rookie, and he doesn't really fit next to LeBron that well, which is kind of why I was perplexed by that draft choice, even though I liked him as a prospect. I think in Toronto, he does make a little bit more sense, honestly. So I think him being included in this deal makes sense for both sides in terms of value. And then 2029 first-round pick, just like we talked about with the Mavericks. Any far-out Lakers first-round pick that's unprotected, sign me up for it. I think that's a huge win in this deal for the Raptors. Now, again, I don't love the overall construction of this package for Toronto because I'm not a fan of D'Angelo Russell. I don't think he's a plus player in Toronto. I don't think he's a plus player in LA. He wasn't a plus player in Minnesota. I don't know where he's been a plus player other than Brooklyn for a season. So honestly, like from that perspective, maybe if Toronto could find a way to send D'Lo to a third team like we saw last year where Minnesota sent D'Angelo to Los Angeles and got Mike Conley from the Jazz, maybe there's some type of package here where Toronto could kind of find a third team interest in D'Angelo and then from there make it work. But really the whole point of the package here around Siakam is a 2029 first, Jalen Hood-Schifino, Rui Hachimura, and then maybe you look at D'Lo as salary or a tradable contract going into next season. It's not a bad package. I just don't know if it's the best one we've got. Let's get into team number 4 here, and it's the Indiana Pacers. There's been a ton of rumors about Indiana potentially going in on one of the Toronto Raptors players. Of course, a lot of his speculation was previously on OG Anunoby, who played his college basketball for the Indiana Hoosiers, so a return to Indiana made a ton of sense before the New York Knicks swooped in. But when we look at this deal, the Pacers now get Pascal Siakam instead, And for a team that really loves to score, I think Pascal Siakam does make them quite a bit better. And I think this is an area where we would see a ton of growth in this Pacers offense by getting Siakam compared to what we talked about with LA and what we talked about with Dallas. I think the Pacers are a team that still could use another creator, ball handler, really comfortable guy to create a shot in the half court. Siakam has proven to be that as a former All-NBA player, someone who can get his shot off the dribble. He's got one of the best spin moves in the entire NBA, offers a little bit more length and size into their front court, and I think it does drastically help them in certain matchups against other like solid big men across the league. And I'm not talking just centers, I'm not talking just Joel Embiid. Obviously they've handled the Bucks and Giannis pretty well this season, but I think just having a little bit more length and size and playoff experience would be really helpful for a team that is relatively young and they have the depth to be able to make a trade like this. But this is a really good package here for the Raptors, and one that I think if I was in Toronto's shoes, I would strongly consider, but I still think this deal makes some sense for Indiana as well. So let's break it down. In here, Bruce Brown, he is the money matching component in this deal. It hurts to give him up. I thought he was a very good signing on a short-term, team-friendly contract. I liked it quite a bit for Indiana, but now he gets routed to Toronto, and you're really kind of reshaping your team to playing a little bit bigger and a little bit more kind of front court oriented around Halliburton, which I think makes a bit more sense for them. You're also looking at Obi Toppin being included in this deal. Obviously, they brought him in from the New York Knicks. The one concern with Toppin for me has always been the defensive side of the floor. Who does he guard? And I think if you're going to really unlock Obi Toppin, you kind of play him as a small ball center, let him screen and roll and do a bunch of stuff in the offense. And when you have Miles Turner, the Pacers just haven't been able to do that as much. So Obi Toppin here goes to Toronto, former lottery pick. The Raptors get maybe an upside swing here on him, and the Pacers turn Toppin into Siakam. It's a massive upgrade into their starting lineup for sure, but it does cost them some young guys, and some young guys that I know Pacers fans really like and that the organization themselves really like as well. Jarris Walker and Ben Shepherd, both of them have been spending some time with the Fort Wayne Mad Ants this year. They're both extremely talented young players, both first-round picks this past year. Jarris Walker, former number 8 overall pick after the Pacers traded down from 7 to 8 to get him. And then also Ben Shepherd was pick number 26. And these two guys can play. Jarris Walker, he's got all the size in the world that you're looking for a good NBA front court player. At about 6'8", 245 pounds, he's big, strong, muscular. He's got some touch, both in the mid-range and beyond the arc. So you're looking at a player who I don't think right now is ready to contribute to winning. I think there's a lot of work to be done yet in terms of his decision-making off a live dribble, and also just in terms of adjusting to the NBA defensively. This is a project still a little bit here with Jarris Walker, but if he lives up into that potential and really grows into the player that he can become, he's a massive piece of what Toronto would be doing long-term, giving you another really talented front court player next to Scotty Barnes. And then Ben Shepherd, a guy who I've always kind of labeled as Tyrese Halliburton light. He's not as good as Halliburton, but this kid's really fluid. He's a really great three-point shooter. He's got a fantastic stroke, but he's just somebody who I think can really play basketball. I think he's a good guard. Defensively, very rough. That's the one thing I'll say. Like, he's a defensive-minded playmaker. He'll get in the passing lanes a bit. He's athletic enough to defend, but right now the footwork's rather questionable. I think that his attention to detail needs to improve, and that's true for most young guys. Listen, he's coming out of Belmont. He's an offensive engine. He's not someone who got into the NBA by his defense, and I still think that with Toronto, with the infrastructure they have around him, maybe they can maximize a guy like Ben Shepherd, bring him off the bench early, and I think the Raptors could be a really nice incubator for development with their head coach, Darko, who is kind of known for being a mastermind when it comes to young player development. You also get a 2024 first rounder here via the Pacers, so a pick that likely will be outside of the lottery. You're looking at a pick anywhere from 15 to maybe 24-ish if I had to guess currently. There's a wide range. Obviously, I don't have the standings locked in by the end of the season yet, so who knows where that pick's exactly going to lie, but it's a pick this year. It gives the Raptors another draft asset as well as 2 second-round picks as well. So the Pacers have some assets to send out in this deal, and I know Pacers fans are going to hate this. Listen, if I was Indiana, I would not make this trade myself. I do think Siakam is a significant upgrade for them this season, but I think if I was running the Pacers, if I was in their front office right now, if I was Kevin Pritchard, I would look at myself and say, we're waiting for something big. We've got a bunch of depth. We've got a superstar player in Tyrese Halliburton. Now we need to figure out the right other star to put around him. I don't necessarily think that's Siakam, especially on an expiring contract, but I do think he makes them better. So it's kind of a catch-22 of, do you make a move to get better right now, or do you wait for a deal that maybe never ever comes along? And that's a really tough question. But with how young the Pacers are, I would be a little bit more patient myself, but I could see the Pacers making a splash like this one. Let's get into our next deal here. This is a deal I like quite a bit for both sides, and it's a little bit more straightforward than some of these other packages. In this one, the Brooklyn Nets get Pascal Siakam and Garrett Temple, and in return, the Toronto Raptors land Ben Simmons, who has 1 year after this season on his contract. He perfectly matches money to the exact dollar of Pascal Siakam. Both make $37.8 million this season. Dariq Whitehead, former first-round pick, the Nets selected him in the 20s in the 2023 NBA draft. He's a really good shooter. Shot over 40% from three in his lone season at Duke. Former National High School Player of the Year. I feel like I say that every single time I bring him up. For a lot of the people that don't know anything about him, that's something that catches people's attention. He was a top recruit coming in to the 2023 NBA draft. Didn't have the season he was looking for, was dealing with a foot injury, but still was really productive and efficient in his opportunities, scored about 9 points a game. And for a good Duke team, he was pretty impactful and shot the ball very, very well, despite dealing with injury. So if you're looking at Toronto, they already addressed some shooting with Grady Dick in the draft. Now you get a bit more here with Dariq Whitehead. I think he's got the athleticism to be a good quality wing in the league. Again, you're looking for some long-term development from him, but when he gets his feet set and squared, honestly, I believe the shot's going in every single time. And the real selling point here for Toronto, you get 2 first-round picks. A lot of the reports right now around Pascal Siakam is that the Raptors are looking for 2 first-round picks and players that are valuable. Now, I'm not sure if they're going to fully get that or not. In this deal, it's kind of the closest thing to that, I would honestly say, is getting 2 firsts here from the Nets. And the reason why, even though the Nets have not had a great start to their season, Siakam, I think, is a relatively easy fit into the Brooklyn Nets offense. I think with the way that they're structured currently, Siakam can play next to Claxton and Bridges and Cam Johnson pretty smoothly and easily. And you have a pretty big lineup already. The Nets have other ways to recoup assets. They could trade a guy like Dorian Finney-Smith. They could trade a guy like Royce O'Neal. They could make a bunch of moves and open up ways to get more draft picks back in, so maybe they can replenish some of their assets. But the Raptors are getting 2, I think, valuable picks here. 2027 first from Philadelphia. Who knows how that team's going to look 3 years from now? Probably not terrible if I had to guess. I think that's going to be an okay situation there in Philly. I don't think Joel Embiid's going to dart out of there, especially given the way that Daryl Morey set them up for this offseason. But then the 2027 first from Phoenix, that could be a really valuable asset. Kevin Durant's into his late 30s, has expressed some disinterest in the team, honestly, as of late. And outside of Devin Booker, I don't know what the core piece for the Phoenix Suns is 3 years from now. And you might say, well, yeah, Devin Booker's really good though, so he's going to keep them afloat. Well, you never know. It takes one Devin Booker trade request for that whole entire thing to collapse and topple and Matt Ishbia to look like a complete idiot. So if that's the case, then Toronto's sitting there with a beautiful asset they're getting in this deal for Siakam. And I do think Ben Simmons, he can play. I think he's really clunky and redundant there in Toronto, but nonetheless, I think going into next year, you're looking at a massive expiring contract, gives you some more flexibility to make other trades if that's the way you want to operate, which is partially why I think it makes some sense. Let's go into our next deal here, and it's actually with those Philadelphia 76ers we just mentioned. This is kind of a big, whoa, what's going on? A lot of screen vomit here. Pascal Siakam goes to the Sixers. This is basically a move where the Sixers don't want to wait for this offseason to try and make a run at signing Pascal Siakam. So they trade for him early, get him for this playoff push, and then look to re-sign him in the offseason. And the Raptors, you don't get a lot here in terms of player compensation. You do get one guy who I have some interest in long-term, but you basically get a lot of expiring contracts. You open up your books long-term if you're Toronto by getting Marcus Morris, Robert Covington, Furkan Korkmaz. Maybe you can reroute Covington somewhere. Maybe a team will have some interest in Morris. Be pretty surprised by that if I'm being honest. Korkmaz finally gets his trade request wish granted, but honestly, the whole point of the deal here for Toronto is picks and a young player. That young player is Jaden Springer. They get a massive collection of second rounders, and they get a pick in 2026 via one of Houston, Oklahoma City, or the Los Angeles Clippers. I believe that is a swap worst, so that's going to be a relatively low pick. And this is kind of under the notion that the Raptors aren't getting anything great for Pascal Siakam in the trade market. This is basically like, hey, teams are a little apprehensive about trading for him. They can't get commitment from him that he's going to re-sign or be interested in re-signing at least. So because of that, maybe the Raptors just kind of punt and take a lesser offer because it might be the only one on the table. Again, though, if I had to guess, Masai Ujiri will not operate that way. He would let Siakam go into unrestricted free agency, lose him for nothing, because we've seen that happen with Fred VanVleet. We saw that almost happen with Kyle Lowry. Of course, they got Precious Achiuwa back, but the Raptors aren't afraid of letting their players get to free agency. And maybe that happens again with Siakam, but if there's no other offers here, maybe this is something worth considering for the Raptors. Our second to last trade is one that has been teased quite a while, and it's a deal with the Atlanta Hawks, although the Atlanta Hawks might be making some own sell decisions of their own. So this deal looks quite a bit different than any deals I talked about over the offseason, where Siakam still lands in Atlanta. The Hawks have expressed a lot of interest in acquiring Siakam, and this deal is structured kind of similarly to the OG Anunoby trade. The main infrastructure of that deal with the Knicks was 2 players for 1, where Anunoby goes to New York, and in return, the Raptors get RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley. In this situation, the Hawks get Pascal Siakam, and the Raptors completely redefine their team by trading both DeAndre Hunter, who's on somewhat of a negative value contract at this point, kind of a similar situation to what we've seen from RJ Barrett, former top 5 pick. Big extension, hasn't really lived up to it. People aren't sure what his long-term future is. The Raptors give him a new shot. And the Raptors here get another really good guard in DeJounte Murray. And I know DeJounte Murray hasn't worked quite as well in Atlanta as people would have hoped, but I'm going to tell you right now, this is a really good trade for the Toronto Raptors, even though they have to give up some second-round picks. They give up the second-rounder they got in that next trade, the one from Detroit. That's likely going to be pick 31 this year. You also give up 2 other second-rounders, 2026 and 2028. But the reason you make this deal is because you get a player who I think is an all-star level guard when he's given the reins. In DeJounte Murray, this completely reshapes your backcourt, completely reshapes your ability to play through a certain guy, and I think DeJounte Murray gives them a lot more stability at the point guard position than what we've seen in recent years from Toronto. Even Fred VanVleet. Listen, I love Fred VanVleet as a player. I think there's a lot of things he does really well, but Raptors fans know at times Fred VanVleet would have games where he shoots you out of it completely, or he would just make a bunch of questionable decisions as a lead ball handler. I think DeJounte Murray a little bit more reliable in that regard throughout his career, especially as a facilitator, and I think maybe could open up avenues here for Scottie Barnes a little bit more as a cutter. And if you're trading Siakam, it kind of reshapes your team in terms of, hey, who's playing small forward, who's playing power forward, who's playing center, and what does the spacing look like off of that. DeAndre Hunter, throughout his career, he's had moments where he flashes his ability to shoot. Coming out of Virginia, he had a great mid-range game, and I think that's something maybe Toronto could play into a little bit as well around DeJounte Murray and Scottie Barnes. This is a really fascinating deal. It's not one that I'm like, oh my gosh, I love it for either side, because I don't think Atlanta really gets much better here making this trade. DeJounte Murray's on a good long-term contract with team control, and kind of a big thing, part of that whole Knicks and Raptors trade we already saw go down was about long-term team control for Toronto. Hunter and DeJounte Murray fit those 2 bills. If you're a Raptors fan, those are 2 things that make some sense for you. And the Hawks, it just clearly isn't working with DeJounte and Trey. Trey needs to be a little bit more active off the ball. He just hasn't been. DeJounte Murray's not getting maximized there. And because of that, he looks like a worse player than he is. So this is a chance for the Raptors to maybe take a big improvement. Now, again, I think the Raptors roster construction right now is a little clunky. I'm not exactly sure how they ever get to where they want to be. But this isn't a bad starting spot. It really isn't. You get 2 players who are still in their 20s. They're both younger than Pascal Siakam by at least a couple of years, so you get a little bit younger. You get team control on some of these guys, and it gives you more years to assess what you have. And let's get into that final trade, and boy, is this a crazy one. With the Golden State Warriors, the Toronto Raptors make a massive deal, and I mean absolutely massive. And this is one that completely reshapes the way that the Golden State Warriors look, which they badly need. And if they're trying to win around Steph Curry, this is the type of deal that they might have to go out try and get done, because it gives them completely new life and a completely new look in their roster construction. And the Raptors get a lot of stuff back, and we'll talk about exactly how that would play out and how that would work for them. For the Warriors here, specifically, you get Pascal Siakam. He has been floated to the Golden State Warriors quite a bit in trade rumors, trade discussions. There's been a lot of noise about Siakam to the Warriors. Some people have speculated, is it for Andrew Wiggins? Is it for Jonathan Kuminga? This deal doesn't have either of those guys, but you'll understand kind of what I'm looking at here as I explain it. Dennis Schroeder also goes out in this deal. I thought he was a really nice signing for the Raptors. Now, I'm not exactly sure what his value is. If I had to kind of give a barometer, I'd probably say 2 or 3 second-round picks himself. And then Otto Porter Jr. also gets looped into this deal. Was a former champion with the Warriors. Found a really nice niche with them a few years ago as they won in 2022. And the Raptors specifically, what do they get in return for an expiring contract in Siakam, a guard in Dennis Schroeder, who's now coming off the bench behind Emmanuel Quickley, and an off-the-bench wing in Otto Porter Jr., looking at it from that standpoint, I think they're getting a pretty good return. You get Chris Paul, and you might say, oh, okay, what's the point of Chris Paul there in Toronto? Really, it's either, if you're going to keep him, it's mentorship for half a season or a season with Emmanuel Quickley, teaching him a couple of things. You give him some time. He literally fills the Dennis Schroeder minutes, keeps you about as competitive as you currently are. Maybe he can teach Scotty Barnes some things. We've seen Chris Paul have positive impacts on young players before. Think about his time with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. I still think SGA was going to become the player he is now, regardless of CP3's existence, but having a good, long veteran point guard like CP3 in the building is never a bad thing. You also get Draymond Green here, and that might be a bad thing. Who knows? And this really comes down to the fact that the Warriors believe we can't win with this guy. We don't know when he's really going to ever screw his head on straight. He's missed 11 straight games now at the time I'm recording this because of an indefinite suspension. There are reports that he is ramping up and will be allowed to practice with the team again. So it sounds like he's nearing a return at some point. But really, this is the Warriors and Mike Dunleavy saying, Draymond Green's not a part of our organization going forward because of all of these off-the-court and on-the-court incidents that you just really can't rely on him at this point. And for Toronto, maybe he becomes a really good vocal presence for that team in a new situation. Maybe he has to walk the straight and narrow, becomes a little bit more like level-headed, I would say. And maybe because of that, you get the best version of Draymond Green, which you could argue is the best player in this deal at times, especially on the defensive end of the floor. He's the best player in this deal defensively, which that's a big change for the Warriors, but obviously Pascal Siakam would maybe outweigh Draymond Green in a lot of other ways on the offensive end that I think the Warriors could lean into a little bit more, and I think it just makes sense with the spacing that Golden State has. I think you could maximize Siakam a little bit easier than what Toronto is currently doing. Corey Joseph's in here to help facilitate the money. He's really not a huge part of the deal. And then on top of that, you're getting 2 first-round picks completely unprotected from the Warriors. You're getting 3 second-rounders in this deal, 2 of them through the Atlanta Hawks and 1 of them through the Charlotte Hornets. So some decent second-round compensation as well. But really the big point of this deal is the 2 first-round picks. It's essentially what you're getting for Siakam. You're getting players who I think you could reroute as well, something we haven't even talked about yet in this package. Maybe Chris Paul you could send to another contender. Is there a team out there looking to bring CP3 in that has a massive expiring contract or a massive contract that they want off their books? CP3 could be a nice, really short, cheap rental for a team. Maybe it costs them a couple second-round picks to do that. Draymond Green specifically as well, when you look at will another team have interest in him? I would guarantee you Dallas would. I think Detroit would have a lot of interest in Draymond Green. I think there's a vast collection of teams, especially at the $22.3 million mark. A team that I could actually guarantee would have interest in Draymond Green would be the Sacramento Kings, who I think were looking at making a push for Draymond in the offseason. Mike Brown coached him in Golden State for quite some time, and honestly I know those two guys have a good relationship, and I know that Mike Brown understands and values what Draymond Green brings to the table. So there's teams that would be interested in bringing in one of CP3 or Draymond, and maybe the Raptors could reroute them into other deals or maybe get some young players out of teams. It would be an interesting thing to look at here, but I think Toronto, for them specifically, if you're trading an expiring contract and 2 guys who come off the bench, getting 2 first-round picks and more tradable assets is never a terrible outcome, which is why I think it's actually a pretty unique deal to end our trade packages. I hope you guys did enjoy this video. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content as well. Really do appreciate you guys watching this video. Let me know down in the comment section below what trades you liked the most. Let me know what trades maybe I didn't bring up that you think are realistic possibilities for the Toronto Raptors in trading Pascal Siakam. Again, thanks so much, guys. Go hit those links in the description, the Discord server, go join that. Also, go give me a follow on my personal Twitter and the Utility Sports Twitter. Thanks so much, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.